Welcome, everybody. It's nice to see such a good-sized group to hear talk about my favorite forever band, the Beatles. And we are very pleased to have Fran Hart here. He is the founding member of the Beatles tribute band, Forever Fab, and he's here to give a great presentation about the Beatles. And I would like to thank the Harvey Wheeler Gift Shop for sponsoring this event. Without them, we wouldn't have such great shows. So I'll let you talk more, Fran, and thank you for coming.
Okay, thanks for having me. So we'll adjust volumes as necessary. If it's too loud, let me know. If it's too soft, let me know. We're here to have a good time. I'll be here with you for about 58 minutes. And a few housekeeping things. This isn't a concert. This is about the cultural and historical impact of the Beatles. But we're going to sing some songs and have a few laughs. And I hope you brought your good singing voices. Now, if you're the kind of person who doesn't like to sing in public, I understand that. Just sit there and enjoy the other people. If you're the kind of person who likes to sing but you don't know the words, which is probably unlikely in this group, judging by my sense of age in here, me being a senior citizen as well, you're probably going to know all the words. But if you don't, 4 of the songs we're going to sing together, you need to know these words. Whoa, woo, come on, and hey. So you'll be able to navigate through that. So let's see if we can turn the guitar on, make sure it works. Okay, we can hear that? All right. So let's see what we have here. And we're going to kill some lights.
Every week. We wouldn't have had the Rolling Stones, you wouldn't have had the Birds, you wouldn't have had Dylan going electric. All of these things that we take for granted as being part of the substance of the 1960s, they wouldn't have existed without the Beatles. They were agents of change. They were carrying everyone with them. Everywhere you looked, the world started to look different. The colours started to really emerge.
Suddenly, adults were growing their hair long. Grown-up women were wearing mini skirts. Suddenly, it was young people who were determining everything. That started with the Beatles. They helped to move a lot of people who might not otherwise have gone along with the stuff that happened in 66 and 67 and 68. They were inspirational and influential in that way, but they also became a political threat.
It seems a bit silly to be in America, but for none of them to mention Vietnam as if nothing was happening.
They were catalysts for great new things. They changed just about everything.
Anybody there on February 9th, 1964? In your living room? I don't mean at the Ed Sullivan Show, but in your living room? Your parents reacting to them while you sat and watched it with them? And they said things like,
Oh my God.
oh my God.
No, my parents didn't say anything.
Didn't say anything? The hair, yeah. They're dirty looking, my mother said. They're dirty looking. You're not going to grow your hair like that. So, of course, everybody went out and grew their hair like that. All the boys, anyway. So, I still get chills when I hear that. Every time I do this presentation, I still get chills. And
I saw them at 65 at Shea Stadium.
yes, you mentioned that, yeah. Anybody else see them in Suffolk Downs or Shea
I
Stadium?
didn't hear them very much for the screaming.
Yeah, it was more of an experience than a concert back then, yeah. Well, we're going to share some of those other stories as we go along. Ed Sullivan introduces the Beatles to America with 5 words, ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles. And Paul McCartney responds to him with 5 words of his own. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Close your eyes and I'll kiss you. Tomorrow I'll miss you. Remember, I'll always be true. And then while I'm away, I'll write home every day, and I'll send all my loving to you. That's how they opened the Ed Sullivan Show, and that's where Beatlemania starts, right there. So let's talk about, we're not doing history here, but we got to put a little historical context to this. So, what's going on in the 60s that makes all this happen? Well, it's very economically prosperous, and we've got the Cold War going on. We've got changing norms and attitudes towards dress and drugs and political views and speaking out and being irreverent. We've got the counterculture developing. And we're killing the people who say, live in peace. JFK, RFK, MLK. I don't know. And then later, John Lennon. So, we don't see the Beatles till 64 on the Ed Sullivan Show, but what's going on to lead up to that? Well, in 1957, John forms a skiffle group. It's just a little combination of musical styles like folk and Americana and blues and so forth. And I put this little picture in the middle. That's a T-chest bass. So they got T from Africa, Kenya, and they'd come in chest and they'd tip the chest over and drill a couple of holes in it and string a wire and that broom or mop handle on a hinge, and they could change the pitch of that wire by pulling on it and playing different notes. So that's how early and primitive it was. You probably saw something like that on the Beverly Hillbillies. So that's 1957. And here's John in a picture, one of the earliest pictures of him performing. And look at who he's with. Eric, Colin, Rod, John, Pete, and Len. That's a far cry from John, Paul, George, and Ringo, isn't it? So we've got a ways to go before we see those other guys in there. And they start out, they call themselves the Quarrymen. They changed their name a bunch of times. Johnny and the Rainbows, Johnny and the Moondogs, the Nurk Twins, the Silver Beatles. Changes a lot. And they just changed the name to fit whatever they were doing or trying to do at the time. So they're rolling along, and Paul meets up with John, and he ends up joining the Quarrymen. Here's a picture of Paul and John in the front with the other guys. And notice Paul is playing the guitar backwards. He's got a right-handed guitar, but he's got it flipped over. You can see the pick guard, this thing here, is up instead of being down like it usually is. Because, he probably couldn't afford a left-handed guitar, and he wasn't playing bass yet. They're not doing bass. So, Cavern Club's famous club in Liverpool where they cut their teeth, really. And they play there pretty early on, but without Paul, and then he joins a few months later. But he doesn't play very well. Feels bad about it. So he says to John, you know what, I didn't play that well, but I wrote a song. I want you to listen to it. So this comes from 1980's MTV Unplugged. We'll listen to a little tiny bit of it here. Watch his facial expressions on the second verse. So that's the first song Paul writes. It's not very sophisticated, is it? I lost my little girl, and he kind of grimaces on that second verse because he says, her hair didn't always curl, and he kind of makes a face. What are you going to rhyme with girl, And so the guy who would later write Let It Be and Hey Jude and all those great songs, he's just getting started. So in the 1980s, he brought this out of the mothballs just to show people that he wrote a song way back when, even though it wasn't so great. So now they're moving along. We're in 58. George Harrison has his famous audition on a double-decker bus. They're riding around London, and George plays this lead guitar part to impress John and Paul, and they say, well, you're in. And they record a couple of songs on these little kind of wax recording machines that they had. Maybe you saw them at amusement parks or something. And they do 2 songs. And the idea is that they're each going to chip in a few dollars to make this recording. Then they're going to keep it each for a week and show their friends and family, play it for them. And this record gets lost for a long time, and then it resurfaces, thankfully. And so we have this earliest recording. So let's listen to, let's go back and listen to That'll Be the Day. That's a typical song that you know. So you can clearly hear John's voice is very Beatley already, and Paul is singing harmony and background vocals. So the flip side of that becomes this song that we're going to sing together. You've probably never even heard it before, so you're going to be able to go home and tell your kids, I was going to say your parents, but maybe not, that you sang a song today that you didn't even know the words for, never even heard before. Most of you probably haven't heard it. It's called In Spite of All the Danger. And this is one of the very few, I think there's only 2 songs credited to George and Paul as a writing partnership. So this is going to be your part here. Whoa, that's it. Oh, you're in good voice. Whoa, all right. So I'll sing the verse, and that's going to kind of be the leading into the chorus. In spite of all the danger, in spite of all that may be, whoa, I'll do anything for you, anything you want me to, if you'll be true to me. We'll do it one more time. In spite of all the heartache that you put me through, whoa, I'll do anything for you, anything you want me to, if you'll be true to me. Oh, that was good. Very nice. So, that is an early song that anybody ever heard that before? No. Oh, good. All right. So now we're into 60, so we're moving along, and they become the Silver Beatles, spelled a little differently on the end there. And Stu Sutcliffe joins. Stu is a great friend of John. He's an artist. He wins an art exhibition, and John says, go buy a bass guitar and you can be in the band. So he does that, and this is the way he plays bass guitar. With his back to the audience because he can't play. He buys the guitar, but it's just because John wanted him in the band. So later in 1960, they finally get a drummer, Pete Best, and they've been doing these tours, Scotland, and they'll later go on to Germany and France, and they're really honing their skills as a live band because they're playing sometimes 2 and 3 sets a day, 5-6 hours a day. So they're getting really good. And if you think back to Ed Sullivan, they were very polished that night. They weren't newbies. And they looked good. Brian Epstein had them in the suits and the Beatle boots, and the hair was long, but it was neat. And they didn't look dirty, with all apologies to my mother. And here's a picture of them back in 60. On the left to right, it's Pete and George and John and Paul and Stu at the end there. So they're going along, and they hook up with this guy, Tony Sheridan. Tony Sheridan likes the Beatles as a background group. He wants them to play music for him to sing, and they can sing background, but he's out in front. And he gets them to kind of rock up his traditional songs a little bit. So here's My Bonnie. Everybody kind of knows that. Listen to the first verse and how it changes going into the second verse. bit and they're doing the background vocals. That'll become important a little later on. 62, they auditioned for Decca. What's been happening? People have been coming into Brian Epstein's music shop, a record shop, and asking, hey, have you got the new record by the Beatles? And he says, who are the Beatles? I don't know the Beatles. He starts to go out to investigate, and he finds out that they're very, very popular, and he likes them, and he's trying to convince them to let him manage them. So he arranges for an audition with Decca Records, big company back then, and they do a 15-song demo album, and it's really good. If you haven't listened to it, check it out. You'll find some of the tunes on the anthology albums that came out later in the 90s, but the original bootleg, if you will, audition record is still out there too, and they're really good quality. But, you know, Decca says, well, you know, it's all right, but we're going to go with Brian Poole and the Tremolos. Right, Brian who and the Tremolos. And they do have some success, but they're not the Beatles. So they get turned down by Decca. And in the meanwhile, Ringo has been touring with Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, another band, and they typically go with the Beatles and play on these different tour dates. And they get to know Ringo pretty well, and they like him. And Ringo's to fill in for Pete one day because Pete's sick, probably not a good thing. And this sets the stage for what's about to happen. So a little later in '62, Stewart dies of a brain hemorrhage. And of course, John's devastated, but they carry on anyway. And they go back to Hamburg and play a lot of dates at the Star Club. Again, this is where they hone their craft. And you can buy a record called Beatles at the Star Club. It was out in the 80s. I think you can still get it. And Epstein finally gets a meeting with George Martin at EMI, and EMI assigns George, who is a producer of comedy albums and more classical things. He's going to be the Beatles record producer. And he's not real happy about it. He doesn't know the Beatles. He wasn't interested that much in rock and roll. But anyway, they sign with EMI, Parlophone label. And first thing George tells Epstein is, I'm not using Pete Best. I don't like the way he drums. So because of that, a couple of months later, Pete gets fired and Ringo gets hired. And now you've got the makeup of the final band in '62. And some people said they fired Pete because he was the best looking out of all of them. I don't know if that's true or not. So they go to Abbey Road, they record Love Me Do and How Do You Do It. Love Me Do ends up not being the one that Ringo plays on. They hire a session drummer, Andy White, right here. And so there's, I think, 3 versions of Love Me Do if you go back and find them all. And one has Ringo on it, one has Andy, and I forget what the other one is, to tell you the truth. But anyway, they get some success with that. And George Martin says to the Beatles, because they want to have a #1 record before they go to America, this is going to be a #1 record for you. It's called How Do You Do? And they said, well, no, we'll record it, but we don't want to release it because we want to release our own tune. You probably heard this one. Let me see if you remember it. How do you do what you do to me? I wish I knew what you're doing to me. I do it to you. Who recorded that ultimately? Anybody know? Close. Jerry and the Pacemakers had a #1 hit with that. So George Martin was right. But the Beatles said, yeah. And you can hear that version if you go on one of the anthology albums. You can hear that. So they're getting some success in UK. They're playing a lot of radio dates. Beatles at the BBC, if you have that album. Great, you know, Beatles fan, you were thrilled when that came out. And they have some success with Love Me Do. It gets to 17 or 18, depending on the chart that you were reading. And later it will become our #1 over here. But their first #1 in the UK was Please Please Me. Now it says #2 there because there were 3 record charts at the time. They hit #1 on 2 of them, but the one that ultimately became the official chart, they only got to #2. But that was a great song. You probably remember that. And as I said earlier, if you don't know it, all you have to know is the word come on. So I'm going to sing come on. You're going to sing come on in response. I'm going to sing come on again. You'll do it again, but a little higher. And I'll sing it again. You go a little higher. And then the 4th time you go high, because I can't get up that high. Right? Okay, you know this one. Last night I said these words to my girl. I know you never even try, girl. Come on, come on, come on, come on. Please please me, oh yeah, like I please you. Oh, you sound so good. And then they have the first #1 official hit over there. Probably remember this one. If there's anything that you want, if there's anything I can do, just call on me and I'll send it along with love. I figured you'd know it. So Tony Sheridan says, hey, they're doing pretty good. I kind of used them as the Beat Brothers back in the day of my Bonnie. Let's re-release the album, say Tony Sheridan and the Beatles, because we'll make a few more dollars. And he did. Got to number 48, but most people weren't that interested because they were more or less the backing band. Although John sings, When the Saints Go Marching In on that. So if you want to listen to that, that's pretty good. I just put it in because I like that. But really, because I wanted to talk about that night, so we already talked about the first song they did, All My Loving. All My Loving. What's the second song they did? Anybody know?
Love Me Do?
No, it was a show tune, unusual. Till There Was You, whoever said that. It was from The Music Man, and I think they put this in because they wanted to appease the parents, I don't know. There were bells on a hill, but I never heard them ringing. No, I never heard them at all, till there was you. Really pretty song, and Paul does a real nice job on it. Then they get to the third song. They open that show with 3 songs, and they close it with 2. The third song is what I consider to be the most iconic Beatlemania-related song, and that would be what? Now that's the second one. What's the other one? What's the companion to that? She Loves You, right, yeah. So you guys know the woo part on this and the She Loves You part, so just jump in. Think you've lost your love? Well, I saw her yesterday. It's you she's thinking of, and she only wants to say, she said she loves you. You know that can't be bad. She loves you, you know you should be glad. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. She loves you. With a love like that, you know you should be glad. Yeah, so they did that song, and we'll talk about that one in a couple of minutes by itself. So then they go off and they come back for the second, close out the second part of the show, and they do this one. Or anybody know? It's kind of an upbeat. But she was just, that's right, 17. You know what I mean. And the way she looked was way beyond compare. So how could I dance with another if I saw her standing there? And then, you know, the interesting thing about that night, John doesn't sing lead on any of the songs. He was kind of nervous, and he said, hey, Paul, you take the songs with the leads. He sang She Loves You and this one with Paul, because he felt a little more comfortable. But so what's the last iconic Beatlemania song? It's got to be I Want to Hold Your Hand, right? So let's do a little of that. Oh yeah, tell you something, I think you'll understand when I say that something. I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand. So now Beatlemania is off and running in the United States. All the boys wanted to grow their hair long. The girls had their favorite Beatle posted on their notebooks and their lockers and their lunch boxes and everything else. And it was good Good time to like music. Now, She Loves You, we said we'd get back to that in a minute. So the cultural impact of that, to me, was that it was a signature phrase for the group. And it was also, if you said, yeah, 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 people knew what you were talking about, like the British invasion was coming. The other interesting thing they did with She Loves You, so you don't have to know music to appreciate this, but this is a G chord. Some of you probably play guitar and know that. And it's made up of notes in a scale. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Well, the sixth note is E. So the Beatles, they didn't know anything about this theory or scales or anything. But when they ended She Loves You, it wasn't like this, yeah, it was, yeah. Hear that? Very distinct. Instead of, yeah, it's, yeah. So your homework assignment tonight, first one, is to go home and listen to She Loves You and listen to how that is very prominent harmony at the end there, especially at the end when they finish the song. George Martin said, no, we're not doing G6. That's a G6 chord. And Beatles said, yeah, we're doing G6. And they were right. It was a great sound. And we'll talk about another variation of the G chord coming up in a few minutes. But they were not afraid to say what they wanted, yes.
Are you using their voicings when you play?
Using their voice. Well, more or less. It's just an acoustic guitar. So I'm in the band, Forever Fab. And when we're in the band, we do things a little differently. This is just, an acoustic presentation. But so, and I'll point out a major difference when we get to this in a minute. But we try to recreate their sound as close, authentically as possible. So the first album I ever bought was Meet the Beatles. The three silhouettes of John, Paul, George up top and Ringo on the bottom, dark. It might have been the first album you ever bought, don't know. But for me it was. But the significance of that, as far as musical impact, was that it elevated the status of the album above the 45. Because before this, people were just waiting for 45s. But now the Beatles, we wanted to hear everything by them. And even though they weren't hits, we knew the songs. And if you listen to it as much as I did, even today when we're in the band and we finish a song, we'll start, look at each other and start singing the next song that was on the album, even though we're not necessarily going to do it. And in the band, we do all our whole show by request. So we don't know all 217 original songs cold turkey to play them. But we've been doing it 7 years now, and we know pretty much what everybody's going to ask for. So sometimes they'll throw out, Revolution number 9 or something. We're not going to do that. But pretty much we can do any song that people ask for. So interestingly, in 22 months, that's all it was, they released 4 albums. That's an incredible output at that time. Not to mention that they were doing films, like A Hard Day's Night and Help a little later, but Hard Day's Night. And they had, since this is really about influence and impact, they had influence in a lot of areas besides music, although music to me is the biggest, and we saved that for the end a little bit on the commentary, but they certainly affected hairstyles, influenced hairstyles and fashion. They would go to India, come back with these brightly colored flower paisley shirts and the bell-bottoms and Nehru jackets. Kids wanted to be like the Beatles. They spoke out. You heard John talk about the Vietnam War in one of those little trailers before. He also, infamously compared their popularity to that of Jesus Christ. And that's why you saw the burning there, because especially in the South, they didn't like that. Beatles were irreverent in other ways. When you watch them in their interviews, they don't just sit there and say yes and no when interviewers ask them a question. They turn the tables on them. They have fun with them. They get after them if they think they're asking, a question that's out of bounds or whatever. They had influences by drugs. If you look at their psychedelic period, probably with Revolver, and Rubber Soul, and probably throughout. And they also, I'm sure, influenced kids to take drugs, even though they said, we're not, if we do something, you don't have to do it. They were clear about that, but obviously kids see them do it or hear them do it, or, this song was fueled by an LSD trip and they're going to be interested. And of course, the music. So this guy, coming up here. He was their hairdresser. He talks a little bit about the hairstyles. So I'm just going to run this a little bit. It's a little hard to understand. Anybody watch Game of Thrones? Oh, not too many? Or Call the Midwife or any kind of British-based show. Hard to understand them sometimes. So my wife and I, what we do now, we put closed captioning on for all those shows. And now we know everything that's going on. We totally get it. I said, oh, I didn't know that was happening 3 seasons ago. No. Let's do it this way.
Hamburg in 1961 called Astrid. At the time, the band consisted of John, Paul, George, Stu Sutcliffe, and the drummer was Pete Best. Domingo, when she met this Stuart Sutcliffe guy, she fell madly in love with him. She was really her boyfriend at the time, was Klaus Warman. Now, Klaus Warman ended up playing bass guitar for John and Yoko in the Plastic Ono band. But she decided to push Klaus Warman's hair forward because he had floppy ears. And when she saw Stuart Sutcliffe, he was a very beautiful looking guy. She was a photographer, and she thought that to get rid of the grease of their hair, she would wash the grease out and comb her hair forward, exactly like she did with Klaus. And that was the first time that the Beatles sort of had this mop that sort of came forward. When they came back to England, you remember, in England, the people that we were looking at were people like Perry Como, who was a big hit, Frank Sinatra, who was in the 50s, and these guys were big, and the only guy that was an individual was Elvis Presley, and he had his Elvis Presley haircut. The only other haircut at the time was a guy called Tony Curtis, handsome looking actor. If his hair was shorter, who wanted to have a Tony Curtis? So you had a Tony Curtis, or you had a college look, and suddenly the Beatles came along and had their hair, no grease, and had their hair going forward. Their hair was getting a little bit longer, and you can't always have that fringe, but if you look at the album, Beatles for Sound, the hair is beautiful. You know, all 4 of them, hair going forward, shining. It looked different. It looked like helmets, hair helmets.
Hair helmets. So that, if you didn't get all of that, basically Astrid, who was Klaus Warman's girlfriend, and she washes his hair because it's all greasy and puts it forward, and she started to do that for all the guys, Stuart and the rest of the Beatles, and they didn't look that dirty to me. Now looking back 50-something years later. So they're rolling along. It's craziness with A Hard Day's Night. It's a movie about the Beatles, about Beatlemania. And I can remember, I lived in Somerville at the time, and I called up, I was going to go to the movies on Saturday, and I called up the theater like on a Thursday. I said, is it possible for you to keep the noise down from the girls when I come on Saturday? Because I want to watch the film. And the guy says, yeah, okay, kid. You know. But I knew they were going to be screaming, and they were, you know. So, but on that opening song, Hard Day's Night, there's another interesting variation on this G chord. It could be any chord. It could be A, B, C, D. It doesn't matter. But musicologists debated this opening chord of A Hard Day's Night for a long time. And really, it didn't matter because the Beatles didn't know what they were doing. They just played things that sounded good. And so on this one, from what we can determine, they're playing basically a G suspended 4th, add 9th with some variations. So one of the guys is playing it up here on a 12 string, probably George, and another one's playing it on another guitar down here, and Paul's playing like an out of scale note on the bass, and George Martin was hitting low piano chords, piano notes, and it sounds something like this. It's a little difficult to recreate on an acoustic guitar, but in the band we use a 12 string electric and another electric and so forth. But this is, see if you can see how, hear how this sounds. Hear that? This is a G chord. But this is a, so this chord makes me say, the end. And this chord makes me think, come on, give me the rest of it. You know, let's go with the song. And that's what they did. You know, they went, it's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night, I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel alright. So when you hear that chord, doesn't it make you want to, it's an anticipatory chord to me. You want to hear the rest of the song. So they're moving along, and they're starting to develop songwriting styles that are more than just he loves her, she loves him, I love you type of songs. They did this one, which is a little different. And this one, if you know the word hey, you can sing along. We'll do one verse and go right into the chorus. Here I stand, head in hand, turn my face to the wall. If she's gone, I can't go on, feeling 2 foot small. So we'll go right into this hey. Yeah, you're ready. Hey, you've got to hide your love away. Hey, you've got to hide your love away. So a little different thing, and come to find out that that might have been a story about Brian Epstein, who was gay and wasn't so accepted as it is nowadays, and John said, you got to hide your love away, basically. So we've got our friend here talking about fashion again. I'm going to skip over him and go right to the first pivotal album is Rubber Soul. And I just mentioned it's a departure from I love you, she loves him type of formula. Often described as their folk rock album. This is the first time they ever had an album made up entirely of originals. There's no covers. So up to this point, on every album, they had covers. Please Mr. Postman, and Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, and Honey Don't, and they always had somebody's cover. But here now they're getting away from that. They were willing to use new instruments. On this album, they used a harmonium, a sitar, fuzz bass. First use of a sitar. Remember this? Right? Norwegian Wood, they used that great sitar. It was perfect for that song. And, it was ranked number 5 on Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums of All Time. That was back in 2012, but I think it would hold up pretty well today. It's a great album. And we mentioned, right here you've got great songs, He's a real nowhere man, sitting in his nowhere land, making all his nowhere plans for nobody. Now, John didn't always like all of his songs that he wrote. He did, I Get High When I See You. He hated that song. So they'd interview him about his writing, and he would pick out all these, I hate that song, or that was a stupid song. But there was one song he really liked, and it was this one. It's a beautiful song. Right? There are places I remember all my life, though some have changed, some forever, not for better. Some have gone and some remain. All these places had their moments with lovers and friends. I still can recall, some are dead and some are living. In my life, I've loved them all. And George does a nice piano part in the middle, but he plays it slow, and they speed it up double time, so when you hear the record, it sounds like a harpsichord. Now, I play keyboards too in the band, and unfortunately have to play it at regular speed because I can't slow it down. So they put the pressure on. Here's George Martin talking about them.
In 1966, John gave an interview to Maureen Cleave, do you remember her, at the Evening Standard, in which he made a chance remark saying, the Beatles are more popular than Jesus Christ.
But he said, oh, I don't know what's wrong with the church at the moment. The Beatles are bigger than Jesus Christ, like they're not building Jesus enough. They want to do more, like gospel and all this stuff. And well, that was taken out of context over in America.
If it had said, television is more popular than Jesus, I might have got away with it. No, but I just happened to be talking to a friend. They used the word Beatles as a remote thing, not as what I think, as Beatles as though those other Beatles, like other people say it. I just said they are having more influence on kids and things than anything else, including Jesus, but I said it in that way, which is the wrong way. Yeah.
Well, some teenagers have repeated your statement. Said the Beatles, I like the Beatles more than Jesus Christ. What do you think about that?
Well, originally I was pointing out that fact in reference to England, that we meant more to kids than Jesus did, or religion at that time. I wasn't knocking it or putting it down, I was just saying it as a fact. And it is true, especially more for England than here. You know, I'm not saying that we're better or greater or comparing us with Jesus Christ as a person or God as a thing or whatever it is. You know, I've just said what I said and it was wrong or was taken wrong, and now it's all this.
What's the most enjoyable
Listen to this.
or about this adulation, this almost godhood on earth that you achieved? Something not.
Hard to catch it, but the
Beatles made a statement in all the newspapers that they're getting.
The report, I forgot I had that on there. The reporter asked them, what's it like to have this adulation, this like godhood on earth? And George stops and says, don't say that. So he, you know, the report, yeah, this is a whole thing about they're going to come out and demonstrate and keep the concert from happening. Well, it didn't happen. But this guy's a piece of work here. He's on YouTube if you want to find him. Revolver, pivotal album number 2, considered by many people to be their best album. Amazing range of songs in here, from Yellow Submarine to Eleanor Rigby to For No One to She Know, Tomorrow Never Knows to She Said, you know, a real mix of songs. Just want to point out, it's also the last album to different content and track order from the UK version. You know, in a nice mercenary move, Capitol Records would withhold some of the songs that were placed on the UK versions, pull 2 or 3 out per album, and you do that for 3 albums. Now you got a new album that you can sell to the Americans. So they pulled off songs from the albums we knew, which were different from the albums that were being released over there. So like Yesterday and Today was a great album. It didn't exist in the UK because those songs had already come out on Rubber Soul and Beatles for Sale. I don't think they had Beatles 65 or Beatles 6. So up until this time, it was all often different track order, and just it was a money grab, really. But they were doing a lot of things, like I said, on Revolver. And you know, when we play our concerts, and we do a lot of them, we've been together 7 years. Last year we did 35 outdoor summer shows. You know, the concerts on the Common type thing. We take, as I mentioned, we take the show by request. When people just shout out what you want to hear. So it might be interesting to note that great songs like Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane and Let It Be and Hey Jude are asked a lot, but they're not asked every single show. There's one song that gets asked every single show. What do you think it is? Yellow Submarine, that's right. So yeah, you think Yesterday might be a song, but we can go a concert without playing one of those tunes, but we never go without Yellow Submarine. And it's not usually kids this high, it's kids this high. So let's do a little of that. We got to, since it's the most popular song apparently in Mass in southern New Hampshire. In the town where I was born, lived a man who sailed to sea, and he told us of his life in the land of submarines. We'll jump to the chorus. We all live in a yellow submarine, a yellow submarine, a yellow submarine. We all live in a yellow submarine, a yellow submarine, a yellow submarine. And we always end that on the last chorus. We do that a cappella, just the way we do it. I'm going to skip past this. This is just Paul talking. Somebody asked him if he ever used LSD, and he was honest and said yes. And then the guy starts asking, well, where did you get it? And Paul says, well, you know, it's illegal. I'm not going to tell you that. And why did you say you used it if, you know, kids are going to follow your lead? And he said, well, you know, I had a chance to either lie to the reporter or tell him the truth. I told him the truth. And if he would keep it quiet, I would too. But I wasn't going to. I made a decision not to lie to him. I'm not telling anybody to do it. It's just what I did. And it goes back and forth. It's on the YouTube if you want to check it out. But the point being that Paul was honest, and a lot of times they were honest to the point where, like John said, they were more popular, and he might have been right, but it doesn't mean you agree with it. He was just being honest about his feelings, and they were usually pretty honest guys when it came to discussing pretty much anything. Pivotal album number 3, Sgt. Pepper, considered by many to be the best album they ever did, considered by many to be the best album of all time, wins all kinds of awards, first rock record to win a Grammy. Paul was the kind of the leading force on this. He would always be the cheerleader for doing different things. He was behind Sgt. Pepper, he was behind Magical Mystery Tour, he was behind the Let It Be movie to record them at work and to record the rooftop concert. He was behind Magical Mystery Tour. And they did some crazy things in the studio because they weren't touring anymore now and they had time to concentrate on recording techniques. And here's the interesting thing. They couldn't, if they were touring, they couldn't have played any of these songs live pretty much back then. They didn't have the resources. We in our band can go out because, for example, I have a keyboard that's a synthesizer, and on the top I can split it into 4 sections, and for when we do Penny Lane, for example, down here I have a flute, and up here I have brass, and up here I have a trumpet, and then I have a chime up here, like a gong, and then the bottom keyboard is just piano. So I can do all those things. I play it. We don't play with backing tracks. We don't do karaoke or anything like that. But we have the tools that they didn't have back then. So to play their songs back then, they would have needed an orchestra and all kinds of players, and it just wasn't going to work. So they were so creative in the studio. That's how they got these great songs. And back then, they typically used a 4-track machine. So you use 3 tracks. So a track is a space on tape that you could put some music. They would record on 3 and then bounce those 3 down to 4. And now they have 3 left over, and they can record again. And they were masters with George Martin at coming up with these great sounds and innovative techniques like, you know, cutting and splicing tapes and doing them backwards, and it's crazy. So, but anyway, Sgt. Pepper obviously had a huge influence on music and the Beatles' popularity. And people were clamoring for a Beatles record, so they put out Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane as a double-sided 45. They were songs written by John and Paul respectively about their childhood. And they were amazing hits, and they were amazing songs. And you might say they're the 2 best songs they ever wrote individually, but matter of opinion. But as great as Sgt. Pepper was, it could have been even greater with these 2 on them. But they had a habit of not putting singles that they just released on the upcoming album. So that's why they never appeared on Sgt. Pepper. And if you go on YouTube or Wikipedia or any place on the internet, you can find out all about this cover, which was really interesting. And here's some of the people that they had on there. You know, Oliver Hardy, Stan Laurel, Marilyn Monroe, Tony Curtis, Marlene Dietrich. It's really interesting, and you can read about why they chose them and so forth. Now, of course, musically, Sgt. Pepper is amazing. Lots of good songs to pick from here, but since I turned 64 this year, 3 of us are 64 this year. When I get older, losing my hair, many years from now, will you still be sending me a Valentine? Birthday greetings, bottle of wine. If I've been out till 2:45, or would you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64? Why is a 64-year-old out at 3 a.m.? Paul wrote that when he was 14, so pretty amazing if he wrote that, and he wrote that I lost my little girl, her hair didn't always curl. Came from the same guy at the same age. Pretty interesting. So they move on to Magical Mystery Tour. It was supposed to be this kind of rambling tour through the countryside and, you know, see magical, mysterious things. Film didn't do so well back then. Many consider it a cult favorite now. As you know how some films, they go down and then they come back up like that. But it had some good music on it. They stuck Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields on it. They had Hello, Goodbye. That's a song we never get asked for. Isn't that interesting? There's just some songs we never get asked for. I don't know why that is. For No One, beautiful song. We never get asked for that. All You Need Is Love. We're learning it this year, but We never get asked for it, really. So here's a little bit of All You Need Is Love, how they started to build up the tracks because they only had so many tracks, like I said. So here you're going to hear just a real basic kind of track, and they were recording it live in the studio, going out on the broadcast, satellite broadcast of Our World that went to like 103 nations or something. But it's kind of interesting. Geez, I'm just falling apart here. So if you listen to that, you're not hearing the classic trumpets and saxophones and horn players because they're going to come in next, and they would build up track by track. And unfortunately, we don't have really high-resolution video of all the things they did back then, not like we could get today. You know, so even a band like ours can have high resolution on our videos, and they didn't back then. Steve Jobs said, "My model for business is the Beatles. They were four guys who kept each other's negative tendencies in check. They balanced each other, and the total was greater than the sum parts." I really agree with that. And that's how I see business. Great things in business are never done by one person. They're done by a team of people. And you can go out there and find out a lot of comments about the Beatles, but as we're going into the home stretch here, we want to keep it going. So they come out after Magical Mystery Tour with a double album, and we call it the White Album, but it's not really the White Album. It's called The Beatles. That's the official name. And if you have a copy at home, it's all white. Go down to the right corner and feel the embossed, raised lettering that says The Beatles. And that was the name of it. But we call it the White Album. And at this point, you know, things are starting to go a little south, and they're all kind of working as session men for each other's song. They're not collaborating as much as they were. And in fact, on this one, one of George's best songs, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. George, I think Ringo had walked out at least once already. George goes out, and even though he's the lead guitarist, he gets his good buddy Eric Clapton to come in to play lead on this song, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. So when you hear that, that's not George playing, that's Eric. And he thought that that might get the Beatles to behave themselves and be a little more civil towards each other if they brought somebody in from the outside. And of course, every acoustic guitar player wants to learn this song a little bit. It's a great song, been played a million times by a million different people. Blackbird. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. You were only waiting for this moment to arise. Real mix of songs on that. And we know there's a lot of people saying things about the Beatles. So they come down to Abbey Road. It's the last album they record. It's not the last album that gets released. Let It Be is the last album that gets released, but Let It Be was recorded before this. But it was supposed to be Get Back, and it was supposed to be about them in the studio. But we see, if you've ever watched the film, they're squabbling with each other. Paul's trying to tell George how he wants a certain lead part to go, and George is the lead guitarist, and he's kind of resentful. You can tell. He says, Paul, if you want me to play, I'll play, and if you don't want me to play, I won't play at all. It's simple, you know. So that gets shelved for a while, and they go back in and they start work on Abbey Road, and a lot of these songs are on the Let It Be film, which only went to Laserdisc and went out of production pretty fast. You can find a bootleg copy on YouTube, and there's a famous director, I don't know who it is, has been granted the rights to assemble a brand new Let It Be film now, some 50 years later, and he's going to have access to all the unused footage. So when that comes out, maybe later this year, it should be really interesting for a later part of the Beatles' career. Last year, I think we saw Ron Howard do the Beatles touring years, 8 days a week. If you haven't seen that, it was in the movies for a while, but you can get the DVD, and I think it's on Netflix or Amazon, one of those. But Abbey Road, my favorite album of all time, arguably George's two best songs are on this, Something and Here Comes the Sun. We get asked for those all the time. And Come Together, we get asked for all the time. Oh, Darling, We Do It, don't get asked for it so much. Octopus's Garden's another favorite. And they did great harmonies on this because it's got the beautiful three-part harmony. If you ever listen to that. Anybody ever go to see Love in Las Vegas? Great. It's just, you can't even describe it, but it's so amazing. People come out and say, wow, it's still going strong after 10 or 15 years, whatever it's been. But great harmonies in that. They do a couple of medleys, the Golden Slumbers medley, which is the second side. That's how we end all our concerts because it's a great piece of music. And, you know, at the end, you know, and in the end, right, the love you make. So we end the concert like that every time. That's the only one we don't do by request because we always put that in at the end. So George said, the Beatles saved the world from boredom. I like that quote. And John said, don't you think that the Beatles gave every sodden thing they've got to be the Beatles? That took a whole section of our youth, that whole period when everyone else was just goofing off. We were working 24 hours a day. And they were right. They were working hard, and that's why they look so great on Ed Sullivan. They come out with Let It Be, which I guess fittingly is the title. We're just going to let it be. Go our separate ways, never to reunite again, unfortunately. Came close a couple of times for the Dare on Saturday Night Live. Remember that? Lorne Michaels was going to give them $1 million if they showed up and played one song on Saturday Night Live. And it was close, but they didn't do it. So, kind of in summary, on the music part of it, these were the first guys in a band, basically, to play, sing, write, perform their own music. You had people like Elvis, who was a great entertainer, great singer, wasn't really writing his own songs, wasn't really playing an instrument, but these guys were doing it all. They took the album to a higher standard. It wasn't just, you know, leftovers. We knew and we wanted to hear all those other songs. They really started arena rock. Shea Stadium sells out, you were there, in 17 minutes. How'd you get your ticket?
Somebody got it.
Yeah, did they wait in line somewhere? Or?
He must have, but I don't know.
Because we had no internet back then.
And also he took his little sister, like I said, we had to hold her back because she was apparently leaning over the railing.
Yeah.
We had to hold on to her so she wouldn't go over.
Yeah, if you look at the footage for Shea Stadium on YouTube, you know they've got, you know, they had these kind of amps about this high, which were fine for a big auditorium, let's say, but not for Shea Stadium, and they were pumping it through the baseball speakers, which weren't designed for music or anything. There's no fidelity to them. But yeah, it was, you know, they set all kinds of records for that, and they kind of paved the way for music videos because they stopped touring, and so when they wanted to, you know, get some new music out, they would film them either playing live or usually lip syncing to a song and send it to Ed Sullivan, Dick Cavett, Mike Douglas, you know, Johnny Carson, whoever. And so they were doing videos back then, really. You can look at videos for Hey Jude, Paperback Writer, Rain, Revolution, a whole bunch of them.
You couldn't really hear it, but it was the experience.
Right, in Shea Stadium, yeah.
You couldn't really, they were screaming so loud.
They used feedback on purpose. Feedback is when you get too close to your speaker and you hear that whining, howling sound. If you remember I Feel Fine, I can't do feedback if I'm not plugged in, but it had this kind of thing. And then it comes wow, back up, and then they go. Remember that? That was really, we thought that was so cool. They were willing to use other instruments and not even play on the record if it didn't call for that. So like on Eleanor Rigby, nobody's playing on it except the 8-piece string section. They use strings in orchestral instruments a lot. If you go back and count the number of songs where you have not just, you know, guitar and bass and maybe sometimes piano. They use the sitar, we mentioned that. In the studio, they were doing crazy things with tape loops, and they would cut things up and run them backwards, and it might be in a room this big, and somebody would take a pencil, and it would be going through 3 tape recorders, and the tape would come around, and the guy would just hold the pencil or a dowel like this so the tape could spin over to that guy, and they had this like endless loop almost. And And then well, Tomorrow Never Knows, that's a one-note song. It's just one note all the way through. Go home tonight and listen to Tomorrow Never Knows and listen to the bass. Paul's just playing C bass all the way through. Yet they made it work somehow. It's a great song. They got that crazy distortion and revolution. It's that real harsh, crunchy, crispy introduction to revolution. They got that by plugging right into the board. And engineers had taken a break, and they said, well, let's try this. And the engineers wouldn't have been real happy about that. They did things like they didn't have an ending to a song on I Want You, She's So Heavy on Abbey Road. And, of course, when they stopped touring, they had the time. They lived at the studio. They lived at Apple Records and Abbey Road to work on these things. And their songs generally were upbeat. They weren't pessimistic as a rule. There were some, but they usually had messages of hope and peace and love and optimism. And they were, fun songs. And we mentioned their output before in 22 months. In slightly less time, they put out these 4 albums, arguably 3 of the best albums of all time, and certainly 3 of the best of the Beatles. But think about that, from, in 21 months, they were able to put out all these great tunes on these 3.5 albums, let's call it. And they left us with, in the end, 12 core albums and 217 original songs. They had a lot more unreleased songs that you can hear, some on Anthology and BBC, and they had a bunch of covers, Kansas City, and we've talked about that before, Please Mr. Postman and all that kind of stuff. And they did a great job on those. And they certainly had an impact on the other cultural categories that we talked about, like hair and fashion and irreverence and so forth. Yes?
We have an album from the Bangladesh album.
What about it?
The Bangladesh.
Yep.
Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, George's Concert for Bangladesh, yeah. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, he did he was one of the first, I think, to do a fundraiser for, as we came to know it, like Live Aid and Concerts for Kampuchea and all that kind of stuff, yeah.
Symphony Hall.
Yeah. So poor George, he's gone. He was a heavy, heavy smoker during his life, and it cost him. And of course, we know what happened to John. But we still have Paul and Ringo. Paul is 76, I believe, and Ringo's 78, still touring, still out there. Ringo gets his all-star band together every year. I think he's done it for 20-some odd years. And he's smart. He gets these great musicians from other bands, and they come out and support him, and he sings, Octopus's Garden and Yellow Submarine and Photograph and It Don't Come Easy. And he, goes off the stage, and they come out and they do songs from their own bands. Like when they had Burton Cummings, he was the lead singer for the Guess Who. He would sing American Woman and No Time. And then you'd have Joe Walsh, and he'd come out and sing some of his songs. So he gets great musicians. So he's not doing a lot of heavy lifting, in his shows. When you go see a McCartney show, it's totally different. McCartney's all business, 3 hours usually, solid 30-plus song set. He does it from Beatles to Wings to solo and everything in between. Amazing performer. He's losing it a little bit. He can't hit the high notes, but that's to be expected. But if you haven't seen him yet and he comes this way, go see him, because he's not going to be around too much longer. Anybody see Paul in concert? Okay, a few of you. Yeah, I've seen him 3 times. Back in the 90s, I haven't seen him. I was glad to see him in the 90s, because he was really still at his peak. And you could squint and close your eyes when they did the closing medley, and the Beatles are up there. The Beatles are up there, and that's what I liked about it. Any other comments about that night in February, or any way that the Beatles influenced you, or any questions or whatever? Yes?
I was just going to say that I was at the concert at Shea Stadium.
Yeah?
And my name is Sally, and their last encore was Long Tall Sally.
Ah, cool. Can't get better than that. Could you actually hear them play it?
You could actually hear it.
Cool. Yeah. Any other?
I was there too.
I know, yes.
Yeah, we had to hold my friend's kid sister, because she kept leaning over further and further.
Yeah.
We had to hold on to her so she wouldn't go over.
Yeah, that's a good thing she didn't go over. Yes?
Is it true the Beatles couldn't read music?
Yes. Yeah. I'm sure Paul can read a staff nowadays. I mean, he's composed. He's done everything that you could possibly do. He's done opera, he's done classical, he's done, you name it, scored movies. So I'm sure he's picked up something along the way. If I showed him an F chord, I think he could tell me the notes in it, you know. But yeah, as a rule, that when they started out, they just knew what sounded good. They just learned the chords, like most kids do. You know, they learn the D chord and the G chord and the A chord. You got to do an E flat. I can't do that. Well, then they learn it. So I remember as a 9-year-old in Butler's Music Center in Somerville, looking at the sheet music. Oh, just the whole wall of sheet music was awesome, but it was like $1 a sheet music per sheet, and it was expensive. And I looked inside of it, and they had a C minor chord. I said, oh, I don't know how to do that. I saw the G and the E, but then I went to B minor and C minor. I didn't know how to do that, so I had to learn. But I was intimidated by the C minor chord because we were doing in class, and that's how you start out. Any other reflections or comments? All right, so just a push, let's see, what do I call it? A plug, I guess, for our band, Forever Fab. So we're the numeral 4, ever, fab, all one word, foreverfab.net, you can find us. We play a lot of places. We've cut back this year because some of our wives were tired of not going on vacation in the summer. And so I promised my wife I would cut back this year. And this is our 7th year together. 3 of us went to high school, Burlington High School together. So it's kind of cool. 2 really talented singers in the band. So I came up from South Carolina to do this spring tour, if you want to call it that. We played in Tewksbury last Friday. This Friday we're going to be at the Polish Club in Danvers, not too far away from you guys. And then Saturday we'll be at the Simple Man Saloon in Clinton. And then a week from Friday we'll be at the British Beer Company, which will be pretty cool, out in Franklin. I know that's a long drive. But on a week from Saturday we'll be at the Jenks Senior Center in Winchester, so that's not too far away. That's a free show on Saturday at 3 p.m. I think it's May 3rd, I think. But it's a big auditorium. They have a stage. We played there last year. There's no charge to get in, and the band is really good. We have, like I say, 2 amazing singers, and when you have a band, the vocals are what make the difference, and these guys are really great. So, but anyway, I want to thank you very much. A great audience. I appreciate you coming out and listening. Thank you.